June 18th, 2021. I want to thank everybody for showing up. I know there hasn't been a lot of information for this committee because we've been doing a lot of work getting to this point and to get the surveys off and running. And I will let everybody know that 2 weeks ago we started the surveys for the staff, and then this week Abby, Kathy, and myself were in the living units giving the surveys to the incarcerated populations, which was very entertaining. I have about 180 new friends that I've learned some stories about, which is actually exciting. And I learned a lot and heard a lot of interesting stories. But in light of that, I know Kathy and Abby are going to give a quick update before they go into their fishbowl exercise on the both the surveys before we actually get into them. So barring that, the agenda just got flipped a little bit. The UVM is going to do their fishbowl exercise, and then at the end we will move into a DOC update legislatively and how that affects the PRIN project. So I will turn it over right now, if there's no objections, to Kathy and Abby to start, give a little overview of the last 2 weeks and then move into their fishbowl exercise.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Brad. It's been great to be back in the facility, and we have had a very good response, and it's been a lot of fun. So we've finished with all the units. There's a number of people that needed to have a one-on-one proctored survey because either they can't read or see or something like that. So I'm doing those next week via Microsoft Teams, and then we'll be basically done. And the incarcerated folks were primed and ready to go. And we've had a very it was a lot of fun. It's been great. So it's really nice to have finally done that. So the next step is we have people entering the data, and we'll be doing some quality check on that. And then we'll do the analysis and plan to, share a plan for how that will be shared back with everyone. But today we wanted to really just talk about since people had seen the survey and they saw how comprehensive it was and how detailed and thorough, that we wanted to know what was most intriguing, and what you're most interested in hearing back about. And so I think Abby's going to talk about how we planned for the fishbowl to work, and then obviously we can talk about what you need to talk about as we go.
So just to sort of add to what Kathy said about survey administration, we just want to report we've had a lot of success, and I really want to thank Michael Groner for his help with that. I'll note that when we first started, our response rate wasn't as great as we wanted it to be, and when Michael really stepped up and helped encourage, which makes a huge difference to have sort of a known, trusted source inside the facility, and being on our community research council with us, he knew how important this survey is and how important a big response rate is. And we're now pushing about 70% response rate for staff, which is awesome. And Kathy finished up the last unit for the incarcerated folks this morning, so we were able to update our numbers there, and we're looking at about a 70% response rate there as well. So we're very pleased with that. We know we have a few straggler kinds of activities that we know we're going to try to target over the next 2 weeks. So we've pushed back our, we had our official due date like by June 18th, and we actually pushed it back to June 30th, just so we can make sure we get those stragglers and try to get a solid just above 70% response rate for both. So that's our plan there. And really what we want to do, one of the big important things is to make sure, one of the big things around this group is to make sure we're all really focused on those surveys, because this is a great chance for the folks inside to have their voice heard, and knowing that we're looking at deciding what changes need to be made and measuring those changes over time based on the results of this survey. And so we really wanted to take some time looking at that survey. And as we're thinking about the analyses, how do we know what we want to focus on and what we want to report? So we planned this fishbowl exercise. Our attendance is about half what I sort of expected today. So off the fly, I'm just going to change the groups a little bit. So I'm going to share my screen just so I can explain what the instructions look like, and then I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
There. Awesome. So a fishbowl discussion works like this. It means that we have speakers and we have observers, and speakers are engaged in a conversation about a specific prompt, and it's just the speakers who hold the floor. And then the observers just watch. And after the speakers are done talking, the observers get a chance to comment on everything. So I planned this sort of thinking we'd have two groups. One where the first group starts talking about staff, and then we'd switch and we would do round two where we're talking about incarcerated persons. And we would each take turns, first, give your own response to the prompt, engage in a brief discussion, and then let the observers take a chance, have a chance to comment and reflect on what they heard. These were our assigned groups. And I just put a little star next to everybody who I think is here that was in these groups. And UVM and Urban, we're going to sit this one out. So I'm just going to move the groups around a little bit. And instead of having 10-ish people per group, I'm going to go back to 5. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4.
Abby, do you really want to split them up, or in light of the small group, just continue with the small group we have?
Yeah, I was just thinking that I think that would probably be best if we forget the fishbowl, we all just are speakers. We can all just, why don't we just all talk about it? I think, we don't need to be so stuck on the time frames, I think. So let's just forget the fishbowl and go for just speaking. But what we can do is really just combine, maybe we could just first start with everybody who's here could just go around and say a few things about what they're most looking forward to seeing the results for the surveys, and why. And I'll actually leave it open to say staff and or incarcerated. So feel free to comment on both at the same time. And then we'll just sort of go around, make sure we can hear from everybody. And would it be helpful if I put a speaking order in the chat, or do we just want to go for it?
Well, why don't we we'll let you run. We'll run however they show up on your screen, and we'll run it across the top, and you can just call on them.
Okay, I'll call on folks. So I guess Representative Redmond, would you feel okay starting right there? Just giving a couple minute comments on the surveys.
Sure, happy to. A couple things off the bat. I really appreciate the comprehensive nature of the survey. It feels very comprehensive in terms of the different areas that are being surveyed, both from a personal, cultural, institutional standpoint. So I appreciate the multiple lenses that have been employed in this survey. One of the things, if I can be totally frank, that when I went to the incarcerated persons survey, I immediately went to make sure that there was something on asking them about healthy activities in the facility that are more recreational, and because I remember from my time working in the facility what a minimum there were for healthy kind of recreational you know, things like singing together and, you know, taking an instrument lesson, you know, things like that, that are not part of like formalized programming, but overwhelmingly in past surveys done, particularly of the women, they were really in need of, you know, healthy activities they can do. You know, most of their activities when they were home were, you know, focused on bad behavior. So I was happy to see that that was asked about. So that was really, really great. And the other thing that I was interested in was the question about, are you able to, you know, follow or you know, have your religion or your spiritual background kind of met? You know, are you able to, that was one that was interest of me, because I have had for a long time great concerns about the fundamentalist Christian, and I am a Christian, I should say. So I am a Christian, but I've had a really major concern about some of the fundamentalist Christian groups that go in there and kind of whip up a lot of, you know, intense emotion. And I think that there is so much more that could be done around healthy religion and spirituality and offerings for the women. So I'm really interested in that. And I'm really intrigued to see what the staff responses are. I'm very concerned about the staff. I know that hiring is a huge, and retention are huge challenges. And I know that there's some cultural resistance to some of the changes that we're talking about. So I'm really concerned about, like, how can we support staff? How can we, so I think these questions will get to some of those answers. So I'll stop there. I really appreciate the comprehensive nature of it, though.
Thank you. Tim Burgess, how about you?
So I want to start out by saying that the technical gods are against me today. So if anyone can't hear me, so let's start with
So
staff
Tim, you are sort of cutting in
survey. I'm
and
very
out.
interested to find out how the staff survey.
Tim, you are cutting in and out. I don't know if you want to type some of your response.
Can you hear me? Okay.
No, you sort of cut in and out. So you might want to, maybe if you want to try typing some of your responses.
Something else that could work, Tim, is if you want to actually call in on the phone number, sometimes calling in, and you could still like be on the screen but mute yourself on the Teams. We might be able to hear you better. That might work.
Okay, I'll give a jingle and see if that works better.
Okay, you have the phone number and the if you need the phone number, just let us know. But
Yeah, if you
it should be in there.
provide the phone number, that'd be good.
Let's see.
Let me call in. Let me get out of here. I'll give you a call.
Okay.
Okay. And
All right. Thanks.
maybe while we're waiting for Tim to call in, Monica, do you mind sharing?
No, I don't mind. That's fine. I was talking already, right? So, you know, I have to say it was really hard when I was looking at the instructions to see like what would I most be interested in, because of course I'm interested in just about everything. And one of the things I am interested in is how you will, and I'm sure you'll do this, sort of compare and contrast the differences and similarities between the staff and the incarcerated, because, you know, we asked them a lot of the same questions. And so I'm curious about, you know, what are the agreements and where are the areas where there is some clear differences, because I think those will be some really interesting avenues to explore as to why. So that was like one thing that was really interesting. I, of course, have a lot of interest in things that are specific to areas where I feel like the work and my responsibilities at the department can help change, something around policies, communications. Those are the areas where, I want to learn more about how the work that I do really feeds in more directly into the work. I'm also very interested in well-being. I have a whole nother interest in my outside of corrections life around, well-being and stress and trauma and those things. So that's just a personal area of interest of mine. So I liked those questions. And generally just understanding, how the staff feel like they can be supported. So I don't think I narrowed it down, but those are some of the things that I was really like when I was like trying to figure out what would I like to see. But I think I'm very, very interested in the comparisons between the two surveys and that content.
Awesome. Tim, are you back?
I am back. And while I can see you, at least now I can figure out what's wrong with my computer someday. Anyway, first of all, I want to say what I was saying before, which was I think that the staff survey for me is very important. And the reason that it's important is because, and I don't think this is a secret to anybody, we have this real issue with people retiring early or retiring from the system. And there will be people coming back in, presumably, to take over the positions that are retiring. And therefore, it's going to be important to not only gather this data currently, but also gather the data so that we can give information and help the people who decide to join staff at facilities to help them grow and be better in their positions. So that was the first part. The second thing is, as an advocate for people who are in the system, I think it's really important that I, at least, and everybody else on this committee, understand where people feel they are right now in terms of the inmate population, where they feel they are, and how those improvements actually, much like the staff surveys, how people coming into the system will be able to live better. So I think there's a direct correlation here between how the staff feel they're being treated and what they can do to make their work environments better. And because that reflects on the inmate population and how they feel the staff is A, reacting to them, and B, what their experiences are and what those who are coming into corrections experiences will be based on the results of this survey. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Tim. Mike Lyon, would you share some thoughts?
Certainly. It's always a little bit challenging for me because I'm kind of involved in the survey itself. Matter of fact, I don't think I even saw the inmate survey. My two agendas is really looking for staff support and the influence of this environment on staff, and also the idleness issues that we have within the facility for the inmate population. That's always been a struggle in my tenure here in corrections. One thing that the facility has just started working on, and I dropped the bombshell on my staff 2 days ago on my executive team, is I just hired my second living unit supervisor, but instead of placing that person in that role, I'm actually going to develop more of a triad model of management here, where that person's going to be dealing with confinement and idleness issues for inside the facility. And we're going to really focus a team right around that individual. So we're hoping that we can come up with some creative methods of dealing with activities and or education for the inmate population that will get them out of their cells and actually looking at life decisions differently. That won't interfere with any of the risk intervention services or educational services that we already offer. And then staffing is, that's just kind of a unique little situation that we're in right now. But we have to be looking forward, and someday we'll get out of COVID and hopefully get our staffing back up to the levels needed. But hopefully coming out of this research, we'll really start looking at how correctional environments influence staff. That's the one that I'm really looking for, hopefully some help on. Unique environment here. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Kendall Smith. Are you here, Kendall?
Sorry, I'm here. Had a second getting to my mute button. So good to see everybody. I agree with much of what was just said, but in trying to think, like, is there an overarching theme or I guess outcome that hasn't been said yet that I'm interested in seeing across the board is safety. And a lot of the questions in the survey get at that directly and indirectly. But my personal feeling is unless somebody feels safe, they're not going to be able to take advantage of the other opportunities or worry about some of the other, again, things on the survey, like, am I getting enough fresh air, for example? So I'll leave it there. Again, I agree with much of what everyone else was just saying, but again, the overarching direct and indirect questions about safety on both the staff and the inmate surveys.
Awesome, thank you. Groner, would you like to say some stuff?
So when it comes to the staff survey, I guess I'm most interested to see the data on if staff feel like they're compensated enough for the work that they do. You know, it's no secret that Vermont is the lowest paying Department of Corrections, you know, statewide in New England and New York. So I'd like to see how staff feel about that, and also how they feel about their careers, sort of like if there's how their supervisors are invested in their career goals and stuff, if they feel valued as employees. A lot of that I think can tie into the staffing things we're experiencing right now. And when it comes to the inmate population and their survey, I'd like to see what they have to say about activities, sort of to piggyback on what others have said. Historically, you know, when money gets tight, the first things that get cut are programs, you know, because corrections is in the business, or historically has been in the business of keeping people locked up. So if we could get some data that shows that the inmates want more pro-social things to do, then that's data that we can take, you know, to the people who make the budgets in the legislature and sort of argue that, you know, we want to keep them busy, but we need the money to facilitate those kind of things. And that's all I got, because it's Friday and it's nice outside.
Yes. Al, would you like to say some things?
Sure, thank you. You know, kind of picking up on all of what everybody said, it's all of it, right? And then to Representative Redmond's point, this is a very comprehensive survey across both boards. And when we started this process, this project, we talked about humanizing the experience, both for the population and for the staff. And I think as we look at this data and gather this data, for me, it's looking at the similarities between the staff population and the inmate population, and what are those shared experiences from a trauma perspective, because I think there's probably a lot that we don't know about, mental health and medical, that there's probably a lot of similarities between our staff, what they've experienced outside of work, and what the population has. And I think identifying those similarities and those shared experiences will help us to build that humanized environment going forward. But for me, it's that culture, safety, and purpose are very important as we move forward. Knowing what the issues are and the realities and the perceptions that our staff and population see inside, from a safety, from what is the purpose of a prison, right? I'm curious to hear what people's thoughts are on that. But again, that shared experience for me, and how we translate that into that next level of humanizing the environment across the board.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker, would you be up for?
Yeah, everybody knows if you ask me to talk that I'm up to talking, so everybody knows that. Listen, I mean, first of all, every chance I get, I want to thank everybody that's involved in this. 17 months corrections, kind of reflecting on it, coming out of the pandemic and where we've been, and a lot of what people have talked about, and the damage that's been done to our organization as a result of the pandemic. We are a damaged organization right now. And, to lighten the moment up for a little bit, I don't know why I correlated this together, but I got thinking about the Grateful Dead song, the long, strange trip, right? that we've been on over the last 15 months. And one of the things I'm looking forward to, and again, like everyone said, these are comprehensive surveys. It's going to generate a lot of data. In the justice world right now, everybody's an expert. Stick a microphone in front of somebody's mouth and they are an expert on what should happen to the justice system. And there's a lot of people that know how to run corrections, but there's a funny thing going on. No one's applied for the job. And there's a lot of people that think they know what they should be doing in corrections. And I'm a firm believer that we can't fix our retention problem or our outcomes in our systems if we don't really understand how people perceive the trip, right? And that trip could be for our staff, or that trip could be for the folks that we take into custody. What I'm really hoping comes out of it is a real clear understanding about what we want in Vermont for a correctional system, because it is a ping pong. And, I know, and again, my good friend, Representative Redmond, I don't mean this directed at you personally, Representative, but, I go in front of the legislature, and some days I leave testimony and I wonder if we can just get ourselves together to all be on the same page what we want. And I think it's really incredibly important that we take this information from the people that are experiencing this, our staff. And I'm really looking for information on the staff side about clues on how we can retain people. Michael knows this. We were in a meeting with the union yesterday. We are in a real staffing challenge right now. And that's been my week and Al's week all week dealing with this. So we tend to be in crisis all the time. And I'm hoping that some of this information takes us out of the crisis mode and puts us into the thoughtful mode about how we can make the system better, that we don't have retention issues. Now, with all that said, I also think it's timely because I'm incredibly proud of the staff, and I'm also incredibly proud of the incarcerated population. We've been through hell for the last 15 months. People locked down, sticking Q-tips up their nose every 2 weeks. And we've had very few incidents of violence in our system. Very few. And it's a real credit to the staff on the de-escalation side and the incarcerated population that they worked with us to get to where we are now. So I'm hoping coming out of this is some clues about that good part of what's happened during the pandemic, because I think it'll give us an idea on how to better build a better system out moving forward. So that's what I'm looking for, Abby.
Awesome. I just want to add, it's really nice to hear folks recognize how comprehensive the survey is. I'll just note that, you know, when we first started developing this survey, we were really afraid to make it too long because we were afraid people weren't going to take the whole thing. But working with our partners, our staff partners and our incarcerated population partners, these were the important issues that came up from those conversations. And we've been stopped more than once, a handful of times actually, about how the surveys ask all the right questions. Like the more people took it, the more they wanted to take it. And we have received zero feedback on wanting it to be shorter. And quite the contrary, we have received emails and stoppings in the hallway or in different units about, I want you to ask more questions in this area. Next time, ask more questions in this area. So it seemed like once people started taking the survey, the more they got into it. And so, you know, we're also really excited to start diving into the results and to start to see what we can get. You know, just flipping through them, it's super interesting, but nothing systematic yet. So I'm having a hard time keeping track of the moving squares. So if there are folks who have not spoken, who would like to add any comments, I definitely invite you to speak up. And then maybe we could just have an open sort of dialogue about anything that happened.
Yeah, I'll say something. So like several of you know, I'm really interested in like culture and safety for incarcerated people and staff. What I'm really excited for is being able to go back and work with incarcerated people and staff to figure out, okay, here's what you've highlighted as an issues and what do you think is a solution to this? Like what would make you feel safe or what would make you feel more supported? And I'm really hoping that those solutions come from the intersections between safety and well-being. So like programming, like some of you've mentioned, mental health, family connections, pay, like you mentioned, Mike, just job satisfaction. So I'm really hoping that by going through safety, we can hit a lot of other things that are important to well-being.
And Jesse from Urban, I have a couple of things I'd add. And one, I feel like I need to just acknowledge that when Commissioner Baker drops a Grateful Dead reference in his remarks, it just activates every stereotype I have about people from Vermont. So I just felt like, even at the risk of alienating me from all of you, that I needed to acknowledge that was in my head. I know that there are folks on this executive committee and in this meeting are, you know, have varying degrees of like sort of conversance and familiarity with survey research. So I just wanted to kind of lift up and acknowledge that a 70% response rate is good with any population that you're trying to get. I mean, you always want to get 100, but I think one of the questions obviously is, you know, we want, with all these interests we're talking about, to come out and say, like, we had enough people take the survey that we really feel like we are talking about the staff at Southern, not every single one of them maybe, but enough, and the incarcerated people that we're really talking about what's going on there. And I think that that's the kind of number that you're looking for. And I will say specifically, having looked at some of the literature out there, that getting to 70% of the workforce at a correctional facility is very, very good. So I want to recognize like everybody's work that went into that happening, and just say that, like, for folks who aren't, you know, as familiar with that, that's not a result that you can expect like at any point, let alone coming out of a pandemic and everything else that's been going on. So I just think that's important to recognize. And then I guess, you know, I just want to second, I think particularly in terms of things that I'm looking forward to, I mean, looking forward is the wrong way, but that I think are really important coming out of the survey, like Al's point. I think specifically some of the items around exposure to trauma are really important. We know that that's very prevalent, that it's a very it's an issue that eats at people in all kinds of ways. Certainly this year is probably one of the most traumatic in both populations that are taking the survey. And one thing that I think about a lot, I was involved in some work looking in the policing context at recognizing that police officers are exposed to a great deal of direct and vicarious trauma, and also trying to build a bridge between that and also the way that people are exposed to trauma, particularly in neighborhoods with high levels of gun violence and other violence, and thinking about whether, even though the dynamics of that are different, but whether that commonality of experience and the importance of trauma opens up the possibility for bridge building and thinking about, relational and restorative work in various kinds across them. I will say candidly, the project that I was part of, I don't think really completely operationalized what might be possible there, but I really think that there's something there. And I think that, the ability to kind of see what we see about that in the data and think about that as if, and we want to see how it actually shows up in the responses, but as a way to orient some of our work will be really important and I think meaningful to people.
I'll jump in a little bit, not just because it's my job, but there's also some things that are highly of interest to me. The trauma one keeps coming up, and which ties into some other things, but one of the books that has been read by several staff members that's been recommended is The Body Keeps a Score, and it's all about healing from trauma. So it's a big recommendation that I'll be putting out hopefully for staff. So looking at all the questions, I'm looking at not specifically what comes out of it, but what is going to help other things going on in the agency. I see there's going to be things that we can innovate and try at Southern, but there's a whole host of items coming from both staff and the incarcerated population that I see that are going to be affecting outside of PRIN, or PRIN will be affecting outside of Southern. The education, the feasibility studies, and I'm keeping an eye on that. I'm excited to see what things come out of it that spark my imagination and creativity from the alternative view I usually take on these things to bring. So I'm excited to see, especially from the data walk and representing that to both demographics that took the survey, to see what more we can spur, because as far as what we can try at Southern, I'm just looking at what else beyond PRIN we're going to be able to take from this.
Representative Redmond.
Thanks. One other thought that I had. First of all, I'm really, really glad that the ACEs are asked about here. I'm sure there is that information collected, but I think it's important to look at that relative to this survey and these questions. So I'm really interested in that intersection of ACEs and some of the responses that you get. And then the only other thing that jumped out at me as an area that wasn't queried about, maybe it could be queried about in something more focused down the road, is in the area of work. I think that work is such an important ingredient for all of us in our purpose and meaning. And so I wonder, I would love to know from folks who are incarcerated, what are the areas of work that they're interested in, that they would want development in, that they would find worthwhile. We tend to come in and kind of overlay, we think this would work well, or that would work well, but it would be wonderful to know what are they passionate about and interested in being trained in. So that was one area that I thought could be perhaps a future area of investigation.
Right.
It's funny that you mentioned that. While conducting the survey today with Kathy inside one of the units, that specific conversation did come up with several of the incarcerated population about what they wanted to see getting out and what they'd like to do, certification processes and stuff. So that actually happened this morning.
That's great. Can I say one more thing? And that is, Just, I know for the women at Chittenden, how important the mentor relationship has been in the mentoring program, and having people who are writing or visiting, you know, certainly it hasn't happened during COVID, but there was a lot of writing back and forth between pairs. I wonder, I personally feel like you know, kind of those healthy relationships beyond your family of origin are so important for healing and dealing with trauma. And I wonder if some question around mentorship or healthy relationships beyond families could be, you know, a wonderful thing. I would love to see that. I would love to see that program statewide for the men as well as for the women. And I just think it's an important component of connecting people to a different network and kind of world outside of what they've known. So that was another area. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim?
Hi. So I'm working with more than two clients who are incarcerated. My goal is to work with them to get to exactly what Representative Redmond just pointed out. How do we create a plan by which people who've been incarcerated, either a short term or a long term, can get sort of back on their feet? Everything from housing to finding employment. I did this while I was incarcerated, actually, to work with these mostly men, because let's face it, appropriately, I haven't been in a women's facility. But I would say this, that the steps that Representative Redmond just pointed out are absolutely essential to helping these offenders, clients, I call them clients, to reduce the population of them coming back to the facilities. So I would agree with the representative that we should be working on those issues, maybe secondarily, maybe primarily, I don't know, but just to let people know that there are mentors in the community who have come out of incarceration and who are successful. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam.
Can I just say that Senator Ballant is trying to get into the call? Thanks.
While we're waiting for Senator Ballant to join, I just want to mention that a couple things, you know, to pick up on what Jesse mentioned in terms of the 70% response rate. We're super happy about that. You know, we're really happy about that. You know, we were like bracing ourselves for like 20%, and are really glad that we hit this 70%. And a lot of it had to do with, I think, the importance of this committee specifically, in that there was a lot of hesitancy on both the incarcerated folks and the staff folks to invest sort of hope in change, thinking we've tried change before, we've done this before. It doesn't really happen. This is a really long survey. Do I want to spend my time? I just worked a 16-hour shift. I don't really want to get my hopes up, but the vibe in the facility is this time is different. Like, this time is different. This time is, we're really driving, this voice is the measurement of the change. Like, this voice is being lifted up and brought back to this committee of change makers to look at, and how can we use this voice to guide and measure the change over time. And I just want to mention that because I think it's important to remember that focus of, you know, why we're here as a committee is to make sure that voice does stay at the center of this, and bringing that up, and it, as we do that, that's sort of our next step is, you know, once we analyze these data, we want to go back to the facility and talk to folks inside the facility and bring the results right back to the staff back to the incarcerated folks is this data walk. This is what Brad mentioned, and how we actually get them to help us understand what we're seeing so we can talk more about this. Like, 80% of people said this. Well, why do you think that? About these intersections between incarcerated folks and staff responding the same way, really get a deeper dive and the nuances. Because the folks who know those nuances best are inside the facility, and really making sure we do our best as sort of the researchers to interpret that information correctly, get it into a format that comes back to sort of groups like this where we can actually make that change. So we're now not quite done with survey administration, in the middle of data entry, planning data analysis, but really looking forward to the data walk where we go back in and then even start planning sort of long-term, or when can we start doing more interviews and sort of
Abby,
looking to next step.
so Representative Ballant is on, so if you'd like to address or speak to her.
Great. Senator Ballant, I don't see you, I don't hear you, but I just wanted to let you know we're talking about the surveys for the incarcerated folks and the staff for the PRIN, and wondered if you'd be interested in adding a couple comments about what you're looking forward to seeing the results of about those surveys, or anything about those survey domains or questions, or anything else.
Hey, Abigail, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm having all kinds of problem with my connectivity, and I just joined, so I didn't hear any of that except for Senator Ballant. Do you have anything to say? So I think I probably don't, but I will tune back in and try to get up to speed. So thank you.
You are joining right when we're sort of wrapping up. So just one last thing is we just spent the last 40 minutes or so talking about the surveys we're administering, and we have a 70% response rate for staff and incarcerated folks. We had a great discussion about what folks here are interested in seeing. And so, as you're joining and as you're listening, if you at any point have thoughts on the survey itself, what you'd like to see, or next steps, don't hesitate to speak up. I won't keep putting you on the spot, but if at any point you want to bring that conversation back, go ahead. And Kathy, do we have anything else to add?
I don't think so. I guess the only thing is that, it will take us a while to, cull the data, make sure everything's entered correctly, do the quality control stuff, and then analyze it and figure out what's significant to share, and then, figure out a good way to present it. So we imagine that will be probably August. And that will be our summer project, and we're super excited to find out, and especially because the response rate was so good, we'll feel pretty confident, I think, about this. So we're so glad to finally be doing this, and thank you. So no, I guess we can turn it over to Brad for the rest of the agenda, unless anybody has anything else they want to say.
I will let everybody know we have 14 scheduled proctored surveys for the incarcerated that required help. So next week, Dr. Fox will be very busy over Teams conducting these surveys. Any more views? I do see Representative Redmond, your hand is up. Had we called on you, or do you still have something that you'd like to?
I did have one more thing I wanted to add. Just because I'm a communications person at heart, I can't help but come from that bias. And I wondered if, I think that the fact that we are surveying all of our, our correctional staff, as well as our persons living inside, I just wonder if there's some kind of communication of this to people in Vermont about the work that's being done. I think it's really important that, some of the questions are very compassionate and humanized, and I really think this is important information for the average person who thinks we're really not doing anything to kind of really evolve and transform the system. So I go right to some kind of op-ed in Digger written by the UVM surveyors, or maybe something at the legislative level. I don't know, but I do think that it's important that the average Vermonter know that we really are in this change moment and that this is going on. It builds public support in a very important way.
Sounds awesome. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I know VPR was interested in the beginning, but then some little pandemic thing happened and their focus kind of shifted. So maybe once again we can engage. I know Nina Keck is always interested in a good reporting story. All right, any other items here that anybody would like to bring up in regards to the survey, the administration, or what they'd like to see from that? Give anybody a minute to mull that over. If not, we can always bring that up.
Brad,
I will
can I
remind.
say one last thing? Sorry.
Sure.
If anybody's looking at the survey at any time and you're looking at specific questions saying, I want that one, don't hesitate to drop an email, because Kathy and I are sitting there with the computer through the month of July and August, and we're going to go down a lot of our own interests, but would love to hear from other people who have specific questions that will really help target that. So don't hesitate to reach out after this meeting. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, and you can reach out to me as well. It'll make sure we get to the appropriate entity to answer. Okay, so moving on, and maybe we can finish this up and everybody be able to enjoy a lovely Friday afternoon. We have a DOC update, and I know that Monica had made some slides, but who was it? The commissioner? Were you going to give the update for, or was Chief Cormier?
I can do it, Brad.
Commissioner, do you want me to share the slides, or are you?
Yeah, I was going to say, don't ask me to do the technology piece, please.
I'm happy to bring them up. I just wasn't sure if that's what you wanted to do, so let me do that.
While Monica's doing that, again, I never waste an opportunity with airtime. Abby, I really appreciate your point about the 70%, right? And how you all got to the 70%. And these for me are the collaborative efforts that bring change in any organization, right? My experience of sometimes finding myself in a situation where organizations that I'm heading up are going through significant change. This is a living example of that collaboration. It gives the process such credibility that we at Corrections could never do this on our own, because no one, and I believe it's a false narrative, but no one would trust us to do it. And I really have to say that this type of collaborative change is what, in fact, is going to bring change. You're seeing it already as a result of this, right? I mean, it's been a long week for us around staffing, and to hear you say that the staff in Springfield, who is our most stressed facility right now, staffing wise, say that they really do believe that this is for real. That made my week, and I'll end my week knowing that the hard work folks are putting into this is starting to pay off. So I needed to say that. So that's directed at you, Abby, but it's meant for everybody on the executive committee, and for the folks that aren't here, it's meant for them as well. So I'll make this really quick, and I want to acknowledge the President Pro Tem. Senator, thank you for your support this year. Representative Redmond, we found enormous support in the legislature. I know I made that comment earlier, a little bit of frustration, but we found enormous support in the legislature this year. And we're trying our best to bring the change that needs to happen in order to have a better system and better outcomes. So, Monica, if you want to go to that next slide, please. So several things happened at the legislature this year, and I'm going to quickly just go through these and talk a little bit about each one. First of all, in the budget, Governor Scott committed $1 million in his priorities for the purchase of body cameras. And I started the conversation with the union yesterday, and I know there's the jury is out on body cameras. Thank you, Monica. The jury's out on body cameras about the effectiveness, but we do know from our colleagues in Maine that the deployment of body cameras on corrections officers has lowered complaints against corrections officers by almost 30%. And one of the things that really frustrates me is we get an allegation of misconduct against an employee. And those processes take way longer than they should be. That's a whole conversation for another day. But a lot of times we put staff out on relief from duty, and it alienates the hell out of them. And we do an investigation, they're cleared. And now I got a very bitter staff member coming back to work for us who sat on the sidelines for a period of time when we probably could resolve this very quickly. On the other side of it, if we have individuals who are misusing their authority inside facilities, we're going to know that as well. And so there's some requirements for this. We have to present a report on policy development to the Joint Justice Committee by September of 21, and then an ongoing funding source to Joint Fiscal Office and Joint Justice on that same date. As part of the enabling legislation language, we agreed, and the right thing to do is that we will be partnering with the union and other stakeholders such as ACLU to work on language around the policy. The policy is going to be a little tricky. Excuse me. We're talking about the filming of activity inside a facility that is not a public facility. And so that's going to be a little bit challenging. We've already started discussing that. And we'll present that policy to the legislature at the beginning of the second half of the biennium in January of 22. We also have to do some training around it. Data storage and record retention is going to be a big challenge. And there is, as I said, there is an impact on collective bargaining, and we opened up that conversation with the union yesterday. And again, the last piece of that slide is some of the folks that we're going to work with as we start to develop that policy. We have the frameworks and the bones to the policy now, and we're going to be working with these other groups to help us figure out if we're heading in the right direction or not. So that's body cameras. Monica, you can go to the next slide, please. Act 56, an act that was related to DLC amendments. The big piece of this, well, I think there's several big pieces, but one of the big pieces is the creation of a corrections monitoring commission. We worked with, House Corrections and Institutions under the leadership of Representative Edmonds and Vice Chair Sarah Coffey early in the session to start talking about what were some of the key points. I had some colleagues come to me and say, "Are you really supporting this?" And I said, "Yes." And it's the idea was fashioned after the State Police Advisory Commission from my days at the State Police. And here's the reason why I think it's important. It really gives people from the outside a peek into our operation and gives a level of transparency to what we're doing, because it goes back to that comment I made earlier about trust. And we have to demonstrate as an organization that we can be trusted by the various stakeholders that watch us, and especially the families of the loved ones that we have in our custody. I think this commission is going to go a long ways towards that. I don't have it right here in front of me, but I think there's 8 members. The commission has to be up and running. Thank you. Up and running by January of next year. And these are some of the areas they'll be looking at. Report of sexual misconduct and compliance with PRIA. and implementation of a retaliation policy. I hear this word all the time since I've been here about staff being retaliated against and our incarcerated population being retaliated against and the population that we supervise in the communities. And so transparency and policy relating to misconduct and disciplinary action. I'm hoping that the intent of this is that this group of folks unconnected to corrections is going to get a look at how we deal with misconduct and discipline inside our organization. The continuing of the independent reporting line at the women's facility, the maintenance and monitoring of that. As I said, the investigation employee conduct, examine facility staffing needs, employee retention, employee working conditions, and employee morale. That is point on where we are right now. We are challenged with staffing, and we're taking a hard look at. But I want to going back to what we're talking about with the PRIN project. When I was talking to Chief Cormier earlier today, we put a new leadership person in place in a given facility in the state. And I want to be general about this because I don't want to single people out in this conversation. We put this person in a key leadership position, and 4 people who resigned from the organization have reached out and said they want to come back. And I think that speaks volumes about when you talk about how staff is treated, and that's information that I'm looking for coming out of the survey. So there'll be a report submitted by January 1st of 2023. And as I said, it's an 8-member commission to include being headed up by a retired judge and also having representation on that commission by a retired corrections person and someone who has served time in the facility, in a facility. So that's a kind of overview of what that commission looks like. Monica, next slide, please.
Commissioner, did you want to talk about the other parts of Act
Yeah.
56? And also, Tim Burgess has a question about the
So-
general members of the commission, which I know the statute didn't list, but I don't know. I could bring it up. They haven't been appointed yet, as far as I know, though.
Yeah, no one's appointed. In fact, I had a conversation yesterday about it, and we'll probably start looking at it towards the late part of summer because the legislation doesn't allow the authorization of the committee until January of next year. Tim, did you have a question?
My only question was the one that Monica brought up about the members of the commission, and you've answered it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. It's always good to hear your voice.
You do.
The second piece is we advocated for the creation of an investigative unit within corrections. And, again, during the testimony, the question was asked, well, can't you just create an investigative unit? And the answer was, yes, of course I could. But I wanted to institutionalize this and not have 5 years from now, this is slip backwards. And the focus of this is really, we struggle with PRIA cases that may not have official state misconduct tied to them, or the investigation stalls from the misconduct standpoint, but doesn't get finished as a result of what we're required to do as part of PRIA. But it's more than just being required. I think we're missing a lot of information about situations within our system around PRIA that we don't get a chance to finish in a more professional manner. So the investigative unit is focused on that. We're also interested in major events. This unit would be responsible for not the actual investigation of cause and manner of death of an individual in custody, but would take a look at the entire system and the systems that we use to provide, for example, medical care or psychiatric support, mental health support. This unit would gather that information and there'll be a review. We've started that process already. Just this week, for the first time, we reviewed for the first time a death in our facility from the standpoint of gathering all the information that was out there and looking at the places in the system where we failed. Compliance with policy and procedure would be another piece of it. And since the creation of the Office of Professional Standards, we've added now compliance to that. So now it's the Office of Professional Standards and Compliance. Contraband in facilities. We have an issue with contraband in our facilities. Not long ago, we came across what appears to be a fairly significant trafficking of drugs into our facilities. And historically, they've just not gone anywhere. The state police are too busy to do it. So the problem with contraband coming into facilities is that it creates an instability in the facilities. Someone's controlling that process, and it raises the potential for a level of violence. So we're looking at being able to do that. And threats against the personal safety of staff and persons in custody is going to be another piece of that. We are going to enter into a relationship, going to the next piece, with the Criminal Justice Council to take a look at the study of certification and decertification of probation officers and corrections officers. That's not done now, and for me, it's more about raising the stature of what our staff does every single day. I heard a lot of this, not really clearly in the conversations about surveying and the staff, but what I've come to learn after being in the justice field 45 years in Vermont is that the folks that are inside facilities and doing the work in the communities, it's almost like they're invisible in the system. And what I want to be able to do is raise that level of awareness of how important the staff and corrections is to the justice system itself. And then the final piece of that legislation was modifying Title 13 on sexual exploitation. It said that the statute used to say that an individual would have to have direct supervision of an individual that they became involved with sexually. Now what the statute says that if that person reasonably knew they were in the custody or supervision of the Commissioner of Corrections, that would in fact be a crime. So that was changed to better deal with some conduct issues that we saw early on in my tenure here at Corrections. Monica, the next slide. This is about the women's facility. Act 50 is the capital bill to dedicate $1.5 million over the next 2 years to start the process to determine what it's going to look like to replace the women's facility in South Burlington. A lot of conversations going on. Representative Redmond's been part of that, and what we've committed to do is focus group work with the women's the commission, the Women's Commission in the state, and other groups to take a look at what that could look like in the future. We're planning a road trip to Maine in July and take a look at the work they've done up there on a reentry facility. A big piece of this conversation is around what can the programming look like in the future. And I think this is where some of the work you're doing with PRIN, even though it's at a male's facility, is going to assist us in determining how the future of a correctional facility and a reentry facility will look. And then the Act 37, this is something that, I mean, it's ironic that I've been hearing about trauma of employees. Had a conversation today with our department clinician about what she's seeing with our staff. And that's why I said earlier in my comments, coming out of COVID, we're a damaged organization. I don't mean that in a real negative way. I mean it in a very realistic way. Our employees have been, we've worked them into the ground over the last 15 months to keep our facilities clean and keep people alive. And it's taken a toll. And so before I came to Corrections, I had been working on this piece of legislation as just someone that saw this as a need. And this creates the Emergency Services Provider Wellness Commission that's going to work on improving the physical and mental health outcomes and overall wellness of emergency service providers and develop recommendations to improve policy and access to clinicians and other resources for the first responder emergency services community. And Corrections is a part of that commission. As the Commissioner of Corrections, I will have a seat on that commission. And That commission, the work is being done, led by the health department, as the tip of the spear. And there's work going on right now to start filling in folks to be recommended for that commission. This is very exciting to me because I think there's been an underinvestment in the mental and physical wellness of our emergency responders in the state. So Monica, is that the last slide?
That is the last slide. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you. Questions, feedback for me? Appreciate you all indulging us to be able to talk about some of the legislation that we worked on collectively with the legislature this year.
All right, let's see. I see a hand here. Representative
Redmond.
Thanks. Thank you, Commissioner. I just for my own knowledge, as we think forward to the session coming up, is there one or two things that you see as like high priority things we should be focused on when we get back in January? We may be there in October for a week or two. We're not sure, but I'm just curious, like what's at the top of your list policy-wise that we should be really digging in and doing work on this summer into the fall?
You know, I'm going to need some time to really think about that, just coming out of the pandemic. And but I will say, I think it goes around, and there's a difference with the legislature and the administration on, you know, we're going into contract negotiations with the union, and we'll do what we need to do on contract negotiations. But I really think some work needs to be done around what I said earlier. I really feel like, I'll just be candid because that's who I am. And the staff hears me say this all the time. I now understand why the staff in corrections feel the way they do. And I use this analogy all the time, Representative. We're like the sixth kid to the dinner table. And there's a cold hot dog there with half a roll and no mustard, and we're told to like it. And it's demeaning. It's demeaning to my staff. It's demeaning to the mission that we do. So many people within the system just take for granted what corrections does. And I don't know if there's an answer legislatively about this, but if we're ever going to get to the point that we're all talking about here, there has to be a discussion about this. And there has to be an understanding. I heard what you said earlier about a message out. We've been trying to do that, but every time we try to work with the media on a message, it comes out backwards. And it's an easy organization to pick on. And the staff feels that. And so I don't know where that is. I'll have to give it some thought, and I'd love to talk with you a little bit about it. But if that makes sense to you, what I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm happy to have a deeper conversation about that.
Representative Redmond, Tim Burgess has a request in there. He'd like to speak with you offline sometime, so he'd like to connect with you at some point.
Yes, of course, Tim, anytime.
Okay, any last comments anybody would like to share before I move to wrap this up?
Right, Brad, I just want to say again to everybody, and I can't say this enough. I know I've already said it a couple times today. I deeply appreciate what's going on here. I cannot tell you how important this is to the Vermont Department of Corrections, to our friends at the Urban Institute for your support and your patience with Vermont. Sometimes we move slow, Jesse, but we do eventually get there.
Jesse.
Kathy and Abby, thank you so much for what you're doing. You know, Michael, to you, to the people on the ground, I heard this loud and clear today, that the impact of cooperation between us and rank and file on the ground makes a difference. So I know I'm calling out, and Brad, I appreciate the work you're doing. So I needed to say that. Thank you. And I hope people have a great weekend.
Jesse, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it was think we wanted to at least have a little bit of space to bring to the committee's attention some of the things that have been done and are also coming up around the participatory engagement parts of the project, in part because soon we're going to have actual data that is new that we haven't had before, also prompted a little bit by the release of a really good research brief out of the project, lead authored by our team member, Lauren Farrell, on participatory research in prisons. We'd like to drop that in the chat if somebody has a second, and also circulate around. But I think, so hopefully as I talk a little bit about like why we want to re-raise that, that participatory component and kind of what's coming up, it'll make sense to the committee. And there's some things that we're kind of flagging for everyone that we'll come back and I think revisit in greater detail, perhaps when we next meet. But just to remind everyone, you know, one of the things that we committed to, understanding that specifically what do I mean will change, is to try and have as much participatory engagement in the research of the staff and the people incarcerated at Southern as we can figure out how to do. Really, we've seen that show up a lot in the engagement around, you know, the incarcerated folks and staff, particularly in the stage prior to the pandemic, closing off access of the facility to the UVM team. But I'm thinking about what should be on the survey and advising and how it would be conducted. I think that we've seen, you know, if I may be so bold, like some of that paying off now and seeing the success of actually getting that survey in the field and getting people to take it. I think that, you know, that's often in no small part for vouching. And I know, Mike Groner, you wear multiple hats, including on those research councils, and want to tip the cap to you on making the case for taking that. But I think, you know, when people want to take it and it matters, partly that's because they see reflected the things that they care about in it. And that was because of participatory work. We mentioned the data walk, where you need to get that, you know, on the calendar, but just to say in broad strokes how that fits in, you know, part of, again, the commitment to try and do things in a participatory way is you bring the data that you're getting to the people about whom, from whom it came, and engaging them sort of first and foremost in that question of like, how do we interpret this? What matters? How might we think about what we need to do with that? So that's a really critical piece that will be coming up late summer and early fall to do that engagement. And one of the things that made me really want to make sure that we got a little bit of time to mention that is, you know, Representative Redmond, what you had said about communication to the public, that is a really critical. It's always been part transparency around this. I think one of the disciplines of the participatory part is to always ask ourselves, okay, but how can we make sure that the staff and the incarcerated folks at Southern are among the very first, if not the first, to start seeing, you know, some of what's coming out of this, and make sure that where we can, in our excitement about the public communication, that we're not skipping that, or just making sure that we're sequencing things so that the, you know, the people at Southern feel like they get to see it first and they're not reading about it in the paper. And even if we can, maybe thinking about, are there opportunities, if there's going to be op-eds or stuff, could that be co-authored by people working or even incarcerated in Southern, so that they're able to say together, here's what we see in this and here's what we think is important. You know, so just to say that to like, and again, we don't want to delay the public communication part of it. That's very important, but we also want to make sure that we're, you know, having that engagement of the folks there at Southern wherever we can. And then more forward looking, but also important, we need to start thinking about, and we already are, and among the DOC, UVM, and Urban, to the extent that we're helpful, team, what is the participatory engagement? What do those methods look like going forward? Because we're pivoting to a point from which a lot of that engagement was really about the researchers in UVM, what should be on the survey, what should be in the data collection, and how do we do it, to a question about, okay, what are we going to do and change that makes, you know, different partners relevant, I think makes, you know, DOC's seat at the table for participatory engagement more important. We need to like get some details about that so that it's more concrete, but that's something that we need to be figuring out. So I wanted to make sure that we're sort of flagging that and elevating it, especially because, you know, I think Vermont has both done a tremendous job with the participatory part, and it's also been much choppier and more disrupted because of the pandemic than we had hoped it would be. So it makes it important to just remind ourselves and bring to the committee, that piece of it, and the fact that, in an ongoing way, we need to figure out how to make sure that that's, integrated as much as possible in everything we do. So that was the sort of urban corner piece that the team and I wanted to make sure that we brought up, and happy to entertain questions about that or comments or about anything, as the sort of national partner that any committee members may have on their minds. So thanks, Brad, for letting me ceding the floor to me for a second.
You're welcome, Jesse. And actually, one thing that you brought up was mentioned several times while we were in the living units when the incarcerated population found out that we would be bringing the data walk back to them first and that they would be seeing the analyzed data, that they were excited to hear that we were coming back to them first to hear it. So that is a poignant point that you made, that they are waiting and are excited to be the first ones to see the analysis and, in their words, to see what we got right and what we didn't, and to make their opinions known should we miss something. So that was a good point that was actually brought up in several of the units when we were talking with the participants. So great. Anybody else before we wrap up? For the good of the order, I do want to express my thanks to everybody on this board and for showing up on this wonderful afternoon. The hard work leading up to getting the surveys, the administration has been tedious in some points, but exciting in others. And getting to this point was exciting the last 2 weeks. And now an even more exciting part is coming up when we actually, as the commissioner, I used to hear him all the time, throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. We're going to be getting to that point soon. So I'm excited about that. Let's see. Someone's throwing up a hand here. Representative Redmonds.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to dominate. I really appreciate those points, Jesse, about bringing the content back to the people involved and having them really sit with it before it's released in a public framework. That said, I totally honor that. The other piece is, though, I do feel like the average Vermonter's head relative to what we're doing around DOC and corrections is about 10 years behind. And there is not enough focus on bringing Vermonters along. They care about this issue. They care about this issue across political affiliation. And so I do think there's a piece here about very strategically plotting out what those touch points are in terms of communicating and really bringing Vermonters along. I feel like that is a piece that gets dropped consistently, and it's why things like the Vermont Interfaith Action kind of like, has an action where they bring all of these claims that are old news, old information. So I do really think that's a piece that is essential here in this, this whole process of really, getting the legislature to commit money for some of these very innovative things. It's the rising up of Vermonters to their legislators who they have such access to that kind of pushes people over the hump. So I just didn't want to not have a chance to emphasize that.
100%. I think from my perspective, that's about sequencing. It's also a push on us to make sure that in the commitment to these things, we're not slowing it up. And it's also my sense. I mean, I think that's what a lot of the people taking the survey and engaged in this want, right? I mean, the idea that there's an audience waiting to know about this and take action on it is extremely important. And I just think it's a matter of like having that plan that, is not slow, but also like has things in the right order. And, maybe if we could do, these things can happen kind of bang, bang.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. Any final thoughts? If not, I'm not seeing any hands. I appreciate everybody coming. If you do have any afterthoughts, our emails are always the same, and you can forward that and we can send it out to everybody. So in lieu of any more hands, I will bid everybody adieu on this fabulous, well, up here, Vermont Friday afternoon. Thank
Be
you
well,
all.
everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.